I'm speaking to you from the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of those lands and the lands on which you gather. I also note the terrible gap in Indigenous health outcomes. Part of that gap that your report identifies is the lack of First Nations GPs. As your report says, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people remain significantly underrepresented in the health workforce, which contributes to reduced access to health services for the broader Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population. So in that context, it's good news that First Nations medical graduates are more likely to choose general practice than any other specialty. But of course, we have much more work to do. I want to acknowledge your acting president and president-elect. But most of all today, I want to acknowledge your former president, Dr. Harry Nespolon, who was much loved to all of us. As I said in Parliament, he was the first call I made when I became Shadow Minister for Health, and we were in contact until just days before his death. He was great company, a great character, but he always put the interests of general practice first, and he always had very strong views. His passion and determination should remain an inspiration to all of us, as I'm sure they do for you. I'll miss him, and I know that you miss him too. Well, I'm honoured to help launch the fourth Health of the Nation report today. It's a very good report in a very bad year. When we launched the report last year, none of us would have predicted what was to come: the Black Summer, bushfires and COVID-19. I want to thank every single general practitioner for their work during both those crises. In particular, the bushfires have highlighted, I think, that we need to reconsider the role of GPs in emergencies and ensure that full support is given to general practice to contribute to the emergency response at every step. I don't think we're doing that enough at the moment. Now, these crises have impacted on you as well as on the country. Again, last year I remember your report dealing with the mental health of GPs and highlighting that more needed to be done. But this year there's been more pressure on GPs, not less. 71% of you say that your income is lower or much lower than the same time last year. But 33% say your work-life balance has suffered. And most concerningly of all, 41% say your health, particularly your mental health, has deteriorated. This is very concerning to me, as I know it is to you. The mental health of our GP workforce has to be a priority for all of us who care about healthcare in Australia. That's one reason why I continue to urge the Minister to release the Productivity Commission report into mental health urgently. The government's had it since June. We have no time to wait when it comes to dealing with the mental health of GPs or any other Australian. We have a crisis on our hands and it must be dealt with urgently. I think governments, and indeed alternative governments, should draw two key conclusions from your report. The first is that we need to better support you during COVID-19. Because even on the most optimistic vaccine timeline, we're not going to see a vaccine until sometime next year. Now, of course, this pandemic has brought about some changes, and some of them have been positive. You and I agree that the telehealth reform has been an important one, and the COVID-19 crisis accelerated telehealth by several years. I joined with the college in calling for the telehealth item extension early this year and for its extension when they were due to expire in September. And your report makes clear how important and transformative this has been, with 15% of GPs providing telehealth care before the pandemic and a full 97% doing so now. But of course, we need to see Medicare telehealth items extended beyond March, both for COVID and more broadly. There will be work to do to get the balance right to ensure the system's working, and I've given the government some room to do so. But telehealth is here to stay, and we need to ensure we get it right. But I think the second lesson from this report is the challenge that general practice faces didn't begin and won't end during this pandemic. This report highlights the funding pressure that general practice faces and the burdens that imposes on both GPs and patients who face record out-of-pocket costs. Yet, as this report highlights, on a per capita basis, funding for general practice is falling. It's in that context that I have been critical of the government's recent changes to Medicare rebates for ECGs. Now, there has been some debate about how these changes were made and how far these changes go. But the practical impact is clear. Less support for GPs to perform life-saving heart tests, to my way of thinking, for no good or valid reason. The government has said they'll review this in 6 months. I say they can do better than that. They should reverse these cuts and reverse them as a matter of urgency. But supporting general practice isn't just a matter of investment, as important as that is. It's also a matter of reform. I was struck that the leading priority in this report was Medicare rebates, and the second leading priority was creating new funding models for primary health care. The message is clear. You want greater investment in general practice, but you don't necessarily want that investment in episodic care. And I 100% agree with you. Fee-for-service will always be part of Medicare, but we need to ensure that Medicare is best practice and up to date with the latest developments technologically and internationally. We also need to ensure that it's dealing in the best way possible with the chronic disease epidemics that our country is facing. Comprehensive preventative care and chronic disease care is not currently adequately reflected in Medicare. Governments have been talking about this since 2006, but not enough action has occurred. To be fair, the government announced some funding for this purpose in the 2019 budget, particularly for older Australians, but we've seen that program stall during this pandemic. We've been talking about this change for decades. The time for talk is over. The time for reform has arrived. If it's not done by the time of the next election, it'll be a key priority for an incoming Labor government, but I certainly hope that progress is made before then. So, I can assure you that Labor will continue to focus on these issues and other issues which are of mutual interest for the college and for us in the months and years ahead. Thank you again for all your work. I wish you all the best.